The land office smells of dust and paper. Harsh light through one window. A woman in deep indigo stands at the counter with a rolled deed in both hands, her jet black hair pinned high. Garrison, the clerk, leans back with a smile. "Your husband's dead," he says. "That makes you nobody here." She doesn't flinch. Her grip tightens on the paper instead. She has the law. The deed is legitimate, but Garrison won't process it because she's Japanese, because she's a woman. This territory has its own ways of deciding who matters. In the back of the office, a rancher named Thomas Whitmore watches. His expression hardens. Will anyone help her, or does she face this alone? Thomas Whitmore owns the largest spread in 3 counties. That's the full inventory of what he owns that matters. No wife, no children, no real friendships, just hands who work for wages and a ranch that functions like a closed system. Efficient, cold, perfect. He rides into town once a month on a schedule he's never missed. The general store knows when to have his order ready. The feed supplier knows the quantities. He pays cash, exchanges no more words than necessary, and leaves. Sometimes he stops at the saloon for whiskey. He stands alone at the bar, watching men laugh about things he stopped finding funny years back. He doesn't join in. He doesn't pretend to. People learned early not to expect conversation from Thomas Whitmore. His ranch is immaculate. The corrals are clean enough to eat from. The fence lines are straight. The outbuildings are maintained with the same precision he brings to everything else. His main house sits on a rise overlooking 3,000 acres of grassland, and every window goes dark after sunset. He spends his nights reviewing livestock counts by lamplight, working through columns of numbers like they're the only language that makes sense. Calving records, breeding statistics, water usage, death loss. Every fact documented. Nothing left to chance, because chance requires a kind of faith he stopped carrying years ago. He was invited to a town social once, back when people still tried. He sent word he couldn't come. That was 5 years back. Nobody invites him anymore. The wealth is real, solid. He can buy better land than anyone else can access. He can buy cattle that other ranchers can only rent breeding rights to. He can buy equipment that other men don't even know exists. What he can't buy is the thing that would make any of it matter, the thing that would make him not alone in the dark. He stopped trying to buy that a long time ago. His hands respect him the way men respect a good horse. Reliable, useful, strong. They work for fair wages. He doesn't push them harder than the work demands, but they go to town on Saturday nights and talk to other people, and he stays on the ranch and reviews numbers that don't change because he already knows what they'll say. The solitude isn't loneliness anymore. Loneliness is what you feel when you want something different. He stopped wanting different years back. Now solitude is just the shape his life took. It's what he is. He wakes before sunrise, checks the water sources, reviews the night's work, eats a meal he prepared himself without tasting it, moves through the day with purpose and nothing else, sleeps when the work is finished. This morning in the land office, he came in for deed stamps, routine. He was thinking about a water right dispute on the north section, working through the legal language in his head, not paying attention to anything else. Then he heard the clerk's voice. Thin, contemptuous. Something shifted in his chest like a weight settling into place. It was a small moment, nothing that should have mattered. A woman turned away, a clerk enforcing the territory's unspoken rules. And Thomas realized he'd been living in a world where this was normal, where a person could have a legitimate legal claim and still be told they didn't exist because of who they were. He'd accepted that. He'd accepted a lot of things as the way things were. Standing there with dust in his lungs and harsh light on his face, he realized he didn't have to keep accepting it. That thought, small as it was, changed something in him before he even understood what would happen next. Her name is Yuki Matsuda. She stands at the counter with her spine perfectly straight, not rigid from tension, but from a lifetime of being taught how to hold herself. The kind of posture that says, nothing can break you if you don't let it. Her indigo kimono is clean but worn, the fabric faded along the creases from careful folding. The rolled deed is thick in her hands, official papers that cost money to acquire and time to translate. She's been here 3 times now. Each time, Garrison finds a new reason to delay processing. Her English is flawless but measured, each word arriving like she's considered it twice before letting it out. There's no accent in the way Americans think of accents. There's just precision. A woman choosing her language the way a craftsman chooses his tools. The statute is clear, she says. The territory recognizes property transfer through marriage. My husband's will designated this land to me. I'm presenting his death certificate. I'm presenting the original deed. The legal requirements are satisfied. Garrison doesn't look up from his desk. He's a man built of soft flesh and small authority, the kind who takes whatever power he finds and presses his fingers into it until he feels something give. He's been waiting for someone to push back so he can push harder. Those are Japanese requirements, he says. We do things different here. The territory's own legal code, Yuki says. Not Japan's code, your code. The other people in the office have stopped pretending they're doing anything but watching. A woman filling out a land claim form has her pen frozen on the page. A man waiting for deed copies stands too still. They can feel what's happening. They just won't do anything about it. Garrison leans back in his chair like he's settling in for entertainment. His smile is the kind that tells you he's already decided how this ends. Look, I understand your situation, he says, and the pity in his voice is worse than contempt would be. Your husband was a good man, honest, but he married outside his own kind, and that created complications. When he died, those complications didn't die with him. The territory has standards about who holds property rights. We don't register land to Oriental women. It's not how things are done here. Yuki doesn't respond immediately. She sets the deed carefully on the counter and looks directly at him. Not challenging, not pleading, just looking at him with the kind of clarity that makes a man understand she's measuring what she sees. The law is written, she says, not the custom, the law. Custom is how these things actually work, Garrison replies. You can file all the legal papers you want, but without the right signature on the right documents, you're not getting anywhere. She understands then. She understands completely. The legal code doesn't matter because the people who control the system have decided it won't apply to her. What signature would be required, she asks. A white man willing to co-sign the deed. Someone the territory knows and trusts. You bring that, I'll process your claim. Until then, this conversation is finished. She folds the deed carefully, returning it to the same exact state it was in before. Her hands are steady. Whatever she feels, and she must feel something, lives somewhere he can't reach it. She turns without another word, and the other people in the office look away as she passes. They look away like she's already disappearing, like she's becoming the nothing Garrison said she was. But she's not nothing. She just has no one yet. Thomas steps forward before the thought completes itself. He's not a man who moves on impulse, and the act of moving surprises him as much as it surprises everyone else in the office. I need to see that deed, he says. Garrison's face shifts. Recognition hits first, then the calculation of who's asking and what that costs him. Thomas Whitmore doesn't come to the land office for small things. Garrison straightens in his chair, suddenly all false friendliness. Thomas, good to see you. What brings you in? The deed she filed. Ah, well, there's some irregularities we're still working through. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. Thomas doesn't acknowledge the deflection. He's looking at Yuki, who hasn't turned around but who somehow knows he's there. She approaches the counter and unfolds the document, presenting it with both hands. The paper is thick stock, properly notarized, the handwriting official and clear. Thomas reads it. 2 minutes of silence while Garrison watches, calculating what's happening and what it means for him. It's legitimate, Thomas says, not a question. Well, technically, is it legitimate? Garrison's jaw tightens. The law says it is. The territory's application of that law is what's in question. Then you should process it. I can't process it without a co-signature from someone the territory recognizes. Thomas folds the deed carefully and sets it on the counter. He's already decided. The decision arrived fully formed, like he'd been carrying it with him and just didn't know it yet. I'll co-sign it. Garrison doesn't respond immediately. He's running through the angles, calculating the cost of refusing a man of Thomas's standing versus the cost of legitimizing a Japanese woman's land claim. Money speaks louder than custom, especially when money is as substantial as Thomas Whitmore's money. You understand what you're doing? Garrison asks carefully. I'm asking you to follow the law, Thomas says. Process the deed. Garrison retrieves a pen, slides the document back across the counter, and points to the signature line. Thomas picks up the pen and signs his name with the same deliberation he brings to everything else. Each letter receives its full weight. Thomas Whitmore. Not rushed, not dramatic, just a man writing his name because the words matter and the names matter. When his pen lifts, the deed stops being a rejected claim. It becomes valid. It becomes processable. It becomes real. Yuki bows slightly, a gesture formal and Eastern and entirely out of place in this dusty office. Not grateful like a servant thanks an employer. Respectful, like one dignified person acknowledges another. Thank you, she says. She takes the deed back, holds it carefully, and leaves without another word. Thomas stands at the counter for a moment longer, looking at nothing in particular. He's just signed a document that will change his life. He doesn't know how yet. He just knows something has shifted. Behind the counter, Garrison's face has hardened into something unforgiving. Men like Garrison don't forget humiliation. They store it like ammunition and wait for the moment to use it. But Thomas isn't thinking about Garrison. He's thinking about a woman who asked for her rights and was told they didn't count. And he's thinking about what it means that he couldn't walk past that. Word moves faster than Thomas can ride. By afternoon, half the territory knows that Thomas Whitmore co-signed a deed for a Japanese woman. By evening, every saloon between here and the county line is working through what that means. In the gold dust, a ranch hand named Curtis leans against the bar and shakes his head. He's going soft. That's all there is to it. Man like that, all alone out there, starts thinking different about things. Another man, someone who buys feed from a supplier that competes with Thomas's grazing rights, leans in close. He's not soft. He's smart. You sign for a foreign woman, you get her land, legal-like, before anyone can claim it. A third voice, quieter, he's making a play. The stories multiply with each telling. Thomas is kind. Thomas is calculating. Thomas has lost his mind. Thomas has always been ruthless, and now everyone's seeing it. The narrative bends to fit whatever gap each man carries inside himself. Garrison sits in a back corner booth with a man named Caldwell. Caldwell owns competing cattle operations across 3 territories and has been looking for leverage against Thomas for 7 years. The land office humiliation is exactly what Caldwell needed to hear. He's compromised, Garrison tells him, lowering his voice though no one's close enough to listen. A man doesn't sign for a foreign woman unless something's clouding his judgment. Caldwell turns a glass of whiskey in slow circles, thinking. He's broad across the shoulders and narrow in the eyes, the kind of man who looks for weaknesses the way predators look for limping prey. You think he's got a weakness there? The woman? Maybe. Or maybe it's worse. Maybe he's just losing his mind. Either way, he made a public choice to undermine the territory's standards. That kind of choice has consequences. Caldwell sets down his glass. I'll talk to the judge. Suggest his business dealings should be reviewed. If Thomas Whitmore's signing deeds for questionable claimants, what else is he signing that shouldn't be signed? The seed is planted. Caldwell will water it over the next weeks, whispering to men of influence, planting questions about Thomas's judgment and stability. It's the work of a patient man, and Caldwell has patience. Thomas hears the rumors. Men go quiet when he approaches. Conversations stop. People look at him differently, some with something like pity, others with something harder. He doesn't respond. He doesn't defend himself. He continues his routines as if nothing has changed, which only feeds the speculation. If a man was innocent, wouldn't he say so? If his actions were justified, wouldn't he explain them? His silence becomes proof that something's wrong. Yuki settles on her inherited land in the first week. The property is small, 40 acres, a low-slung house built 30 years back, but it's clear and unencumbered now. She works from sunrise to sunset. The fence on the north boundary has collapsed in sections, and she rebuilds it with her own hands, cutting new posts, driving them into the ground, stringing the wire with methodical precision. The overgrown garden becomes ordered. She clears the weeds, turns the soil, plants herbs and vegetables with the care of a woman planting roots, not just crops. She's visible in town only when necessary. She buys supplies early in the morning when few people are there, pays in advance, leaves without lingering. She doesn't hide. She just doesn't advertise her presence. Neither Thomas nor Yuki understands yet that the ground is shifting beneath them, that Garrison and Caldwell are already moving, already building the machinery that will come for them both. Margaret Devereaux wakes on the third day of fever and can't remember her own daughter's name. The fever lives in her joints like something with teeth, grinding behind her eyes, turning her skin to paper. The local doctor came twice and left her with nothing but a bottle of laudanum that makes her sleep without making her better. Her husband Robert watches her deteriorate. By the fifth day, he's asking people in town where to find someone who knows anything about healing outside the doctor's methods. Someone mentions a Japanese woman on the East Ridge. Someone else warns him against it. Robert stops listening after the first mention. He rides to Yuki's property without announcing himself. The sun is high and unforgiving. Dust rises from the path where his horse walks. He's carrying his wife like she weighs nothing, which means she weighs everything he can't afford to lose. Yuki opens her door and understands immediately. She doesn't ask questions that don't matter. She has Robert lay Margaret on a clean table in her back room, where light comes through a single window and the air smells like herbs drying on the walls. Basil. Something else he doesn't recognize, something green. She examines Margaret with hands that move like they're reading something written on skin. She touches the inside of her wrist for a long time, eyes closed. She asks questions in the language of symptoms and timing, not as a doctor speaking down, but as a woman gathering information. When was the fever highest? What color was the urine? Has she been sweating? What does the sweat smell like? Each answer arrives in Margaret's voice, weak but present. Yuki begins to work. She pulls herbs from the bundles on her walls. Some Margaret recognizes as garden plants, some she's never seen. She crushes them in a wooden bowl with a stone pestle, the sound hollow and rhythmic. Water heats in a metal vessel. The crushed herbs go into the water. The steam rises and carries a smell that's bitter and clean. When it cools enough to drink, Yuki brings it to Margaret's lips. Small sips, she says. 3 times today, 3 times tomorrow. Then she produces needles. So small they look like they couldn't exist, like the light is playing tricks. Margaret flinches. Yuki moves faster than the flinch can follow, and the needle slides in just above Margaret's wrist. Margaret doesn't feel it enter. She feels something else, a shift, like pressure releasing, like something that was locked has been given permission to move. Yuki places 5 more needles along Margaret's arm, her leg, the base of her skull. Each one disappears into skin like it belongs there. She leaves them for a time that might be 5 minutes or 30. Margaret can't keep time in her fever state. Then she removes them with the same impossible precision. By the 3rd day, the fever breaks. Margaret's skin becomes skin again instead of a furnace. Her eyes focus. She recognizes her husband and cries, not from pain but from the absence of it. Robert brings eggs from his ranch. He brings vegetables. He brings a man to repair Yuki's roof, which he's noticed is missing shingles. He tells everyone he knows what happened. His wife was dying. The Japanese woman saved her. Not in some mystical way, in a way that required skill and knowledge that the local doctor didn't have. Word moves differently this time. It carries gratitude instead of suspicion. Other families begin appearing at Yuki's door. A child with inflamed joints. An old man with pain that moves between his organs like something alive. A pregnant woman afraid her baby will come too early. Yuki treats them all. She never asks for payment. She accepts what people offer. A basket of vegetables, flour for bread, work done on her property. She builds a network of obligation that flows toward her, not away. Thomas notices the increased traffic on the East Ridge. He understands what it means. He says nothing to anyone, but he understands. Caldwell understands as well. The Japanese woman isn't just a problem for Thomas's reputation anymore. She's becoming a point of influence, a woman people trust. That kind of power compounds. That's when Caldwell moves beyond rumor into something concrete. Caldwell files the complaint on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered to the Territorial Land Office in the capital. The document is a work of careful language. Caldwell alleges that Thomas Whitmore co-signed the deed under duress, that he was misled about the legitimacy of Yuki's claim, that the entire transaction was irregular and designed to circumvent the territory's protections against foreign ownership of productive land. None of it is true. All of it sounds official enough to require investigation. The territorial inspector arrives 11 days later. His name is Hutchins, a lean man in a gray suit with the careful movements of someone accustomed to making decisions that affect other people's lives. He carries a leather case containing copies of the deed, affidavits from Caldwell, and a mandate to review the circumstances surrounding the signature. The first person he interviews is Garrison. Garrison has rehearsed this. He sits across from Hutchins in the land office and chooses his words like a man placing stones in water, creating a path that appears solid but yields beneath weight. He says Thomas arrived unexpectedly, that Thomas seemed agitated, that when Garrison attempted to explain the irregularities in the claim, Thomas insisted on signing immediately, without fully reading the document. Garrison's voice carries regret. He was only trying to protect the territory's interests. Did Whitmore make any statements suggesting coercion? Hutchins asks. Not in those words, Garrison says carefully, but the pressure was clear. He wanted this resolved. He didn't ask questions. A man asking questions would read the document. He just signed. Hutchins writes this down and moves on. Thomas comes in the next morning. He sits in the same chair Garrison occupied, and Hutchins reviews the deed before him. Thomas takes his time reading it again, though he's already read it twice since signing. Walk me through what happened, Hutchins says. I overheard the clerk refusing a legitimate claim based on the applicant's heritage. I asked to see the document. It was legitimate. I offered to co-sign. The clerk processed it. Did anyone pressure you? No. Did you feel pressured? No. Why did you co-sign? Thomas considers this. The honest answer is the only answer he has. Because the law allows it. Because the claim was valid. Because refusing to sign didn't cost me anything except the ability to look at myself. Hutchins' expression doesn't shift, but something in his eyes changes. He's heard men justify questionable decisions before. This man isn't justifying. He's stating facts about himself. Yuki comes in the afternoon. She wears the same indigo kimono, her hair pinned the same way. She sits in the same chair, and Hutchins begins the same questions. She answers with the same precision she brings to everything. The deed is her husband's property, transferred through legal marriage and documented will. She inherited it legitimately. She filed the claim appropriately. Whitmore signed because she asked him to help her claim what was already hers. Did you coerce him? Hutchins asks. No. Did you mislead him about the legitimacy of your claim? I explained my situation. The documents speak for themselves. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't plead. She doesn't perform gratitude or deference. She presents facts and lets them stand. Hutchins spends 3 days reviewing the deed itself, the filing records, the original will. The document is precisely as legitimate as Thomas said. The claim is precisely as valid as Yuki described. There are no irregularities in the paperwork itself. But irregularities exist in the context, or so Hutchins decides. The haste of the signing, the unusual nature of a rancher of Thomas's standing involving himself in such matters, the presence of a foreign woman making claims that challenge the territory's established customs. He files his report. The deed is technically valid, but the circumstances warrant further review. The property is placed under provisional hold. Yuki cannot sell it, mortgage it, or undertake significant improvements. She can occupy the land, but she cannot treat it as fully hers. It's not a refusal. It's not a confirmation. It's a trap dressed in bureaucratic language, and Thomas understands immediately that this was never about the deed. This is about breaking him. This is about isolating Yuki until she leaves or gives up. Caldwell has moved from rumor to something concrete. Now Thomas is out of conventional moves. Caldwell rides to Thomas's ranch on a Saturday morning when the work is heaviest. He arrives with no announcement, ties his horse to the post, and walks directly toward the main house like he owns the place. Thomas is reviewing water rights documents in his study. He sees Caldwell through the window and doesn't rise to greet him. They sit across from each other in a room that smells like leather and old paper. Caldwell gets straight to it. "The investigation's going to close if you stop supporting the woman," he says. "Simple as that. Hutchins is looking for a reason to move on. You withdraw your co-signature request, file a statement saying you were misled about the legitimacy of her claim, and this whole thing ends. Your reputation clears. Her claim gets rejected on its own merits. Everyone moves forward." Thomas doesn't answer immediately. He's looking at Caldwell the way he looks at a cow checking the fence line, calculating whether it's a temporary problem or something that requires intervention. "No," he says. Caldwell's posture shifts. The offer was real. Now comes the teeth behind it. "That's unfortunate," he says, and his voice stays level, but something in it hardens. "Because I've been talking to people who know about medical practice in territories. Turns out there's statutes about unlicensed physicians, about people dispensing medicine without proper authorization. The Japanese woman's been treating people without a license, charging them, or accepting payment through labor. That's technically a violation of territorial law." Thomas sees it then, the whole architecture of what Caldwell's built. "She doesn't charge," Thomas says. "Doesn't matter. The law doesn't care about charity. It cares about who's authorized to practice medicine. If I file a complaint with the Territorial Medical Board, they'll have to investigate. And once they investigate, they'll find that she's been administering substances and medical treatment to people in this territory without proper credentials. That's not a gray area. That's a crime." Thomas understands the trap completely now. Yuki's greatest strength, her knowledge, her skill, the way she's woven herself into the community through healing, is also her greatest vulnerability in a system that doesn't recognize what she is. Caldwell has found the weakness, and he's going to use it. "You're threatening her," Thomas says. "I'm explaining reality. You support her claim, I file the complaint. The medical board investigates. She gets prosecuted for unlicensed practice. Either way, her land claim becomes irrelevant because she'll be dealing with criminal charges. Drop the support, I don't file. Clean resolution for everyone." Caldwell leaves before Thomas can respond, which means there's nothing more to say. The threat has been delivered. The choice has been stated. Thomas sits alone in his study with the water rights documents forgotten in front of him. He rides to Yuki's property as the sun moves toward the horizon. The light is gold and thick. Her garden is in full growth now, herbs and vegetables arranged in careful rows. She's sweeping the front step when he arrives, and she sets down the broom without surprise. "Caldwell came to see me," Thomas says before she can offer hospitality. "He's going to file a complaint with the Territorial Medical Board, claims you're practicing medicine without a license. Says if I withdraw my support for your claim, he'll drop it." He watches her face and sees nothing there. No fear, no anger, just the same steady calm she brings to everything. "Come inside," she says. Her house is spare, clean. Herbs hang from the ceiling beams. The walls are bare wood. She pours water into 2 cups and sits across from him at a simple table. "In Japan," she says, "I was a healer, not a doctor, not a physician, a healer. The distinction mattered there because people understood what it meant. Here, the distinction doesn't matter because the word itself doesn't exist in your system." She takes a long drink. "I'm sorry," Thomas says. "I created this situation with my signature." "You didn't create anything. You revealed what was already there. The injustice was there before you signed. The system that can't see me was already in place. Your signature didn't change those things. It just forced them to become visible." She leans forward slightly. "Did you sign because you believed it was right, or because you felt obligated to fix something?" Thomas considers this honestly. "Both, but the belief came first." She nods once. "Then trust that I can manage what comes next. This is my fight now, not yours." Yuki's first move isn't legal, it's personal. She visits every family she's treated, early mornings, late afternoons, times when men are working and she can speak to the women without an audience of curiosity. She brings nothing. She asks for one thing. She asks them to write down what happened. The illness, the date, what they tried before coming to her, what she did, what changed. She provides paper and a pen if they don't have one. Most of the women can write. Some can't, and their husbands write instead, or their older children. The point isn't fancy handwriting. The point is documentation. She collects 17 accounts over the course of 2 weeks. A child's fever that broke in 3 days. An old man's joint pain that receded enough for him to work again. A pregnant woman who carried to full term when everyone believed she'd lose the baby. A rancher's wife with a cough so severe she couldn't lie flat, gone within a week. Each account dated, each one specific about symptoms and timelines and results. Then she does something bolder. She writes to the territorial medical inspector herself, not asking for anything, just requesting an appointment to discuss her medical practice. The letter is formal, polite, direct. Hutchins arrives 3 weeks later, the same man who'd placed her land under provisional hold. He's skeptical. It shows in the way he moves through her house, examining her herbs like they're evidence of something questionable. She doesn't defend herself, she educates. Kampo medicine works with the body's systems, she explains, placing her 17 accounts on the table in front of him, not against them. When someone has fever, the fever is the body trying to burn something away. You don't fight that, you support it. You give the body what it needs to do its work more efficiently. She shows him her herb preparations, ginger root dried and cut, chrysanthemum flowers, something he doesn't recognize and asks about. She calls it kuzu, explains it comes from a plant that grows in Asia, that it strengthens digestion, that she harvested it herself or received it from families grateful enough to help her source ingredients. These are not magic, she says. They are plants. They contain compounds. The body recognizes those compounds and responds. Hutchins reads through her accounts. He sees dates that verify, families he knows, results he can't dismiss as coincidence or placebo. The acupuncture, he says. How does that work? She shows him diagrams, not Japanese diagrams, but ones she's drawn herself, mapping points on the human body and the pathways between them. She explains that stimulating specific points creates specific responses, that the body contains information encoded in its own geography, that an experienced practitioner learns to read that geography the way a prospector learns to read rock formations. Would you demonstrate? Hutchins asks. She does. She inserts needles so carefully he barely sees them enter. She leaves them for a measured time. She removes them with the same precision. When it's done, Hutchins feels something in his chest release. Nothing dramatic, just a slight easing of tension he'd been carrying without realizing it. I can't license something I don't fully understand, he tells her, but I can recommend that the medical board stop pursuing this as criminal. Your practice produces measurable results. That matters more than whether it fits into our existing categories. He leaves with copies of her accounts and her diagrams. Within a week, Caldwell's complaint is withdrawn. Not dismissed, but withdrawn, which means it disappears from the record entirely. The same week, Thomas brings evidence to the territorial judge. Caldwell's been embezzling from the cattle cooperative for 6 years. The numbers don't lie. Thomas doesn't do this to protect Yuki. He does it because the crime is real and because a man like Caldwell should answer for what he's taken. Caldwell leaves the territory before charges can be filed. He abandons his operations, his cattle, his position. He simply vanishes into whatever world exists for men who've been exposed. Garrison's connection to Caldwell becomes a liability. He resigns from his position the same week Caldwell disappears. He takes a clerk's job in another town and disappears more quietly than Caldwell, but just as completely. The territorial inspector revises his report on Yuki's deed. No further review necessary. The claim is valid. The property is released from provisional hold. She owns her land. Completely. Finally. 3 months after Yuki's claim was validated, a small clinic stands on her property. Not elaborate, not fancy. A room with shelves holding jars of dried herbs, bundles of plants tied with twine, bottles of oils and liquids. A narrow bed covered in clean white fabric. A small table where she works, measuring, preparing, organizing her knowledge into physical form. She operates openly now, no longer moving through town at hours when fewer people will see her. She posts a simple sign at the entrance to her property, a character in Japanese, then underneath in English, healer. People come from neighboring territories. They come because word spreads about someone whose hands know things. They come because they've exhausted other options. They come because they get better. Thomas visits every few weeks. He brings supplies she mentions needing, cloth for wrapping bandages, jars for storage. He sits with her sometimes, drinking tea that tastes like leaves and patience. They don't talk much. The conversation that mattered already happened. What remains is something different. The presence of someone who understands that the cost of standing up wasn't paid in a single moment, but across the days and weeks and months that followed. They're not companions in the way that word usually means. They're not distant either. They've found something between those states. Respect that doesn't require familiarity. Understanding that doesn't demand closeness. A kind of acceptance that each of them carries their own solitude, their own exile, and that watching someone else carry theirs is enough. The territory split into 2 camps. Some ranchers see Thomas as a man of principle, someone willing to risk his own standing for what's legal and right. Others view him as a man who challenged the established order, who made space for something foreign to take root. Both versions are true. Both versions live in how people describe him when he's not in the room. Yuki remains an outsider. She's always going to be an outsider. She's Japanese. She's a woman in a landscape built by men. She doesn't attend church or socials or the gatherings that bind communities together through repetition and expectation. She lives on the margin and operates from it. But she's no longer invisible. Her jet black hair pinned in that traditional way has become a landmark. People recognize her on sight. They acknowledge her with nods instead of pretense. Caldwell's absence left a vacuum. His cattle operations were bought by a consortium of smaller ranchers. The territorial cooperative recovered the stolen funds. The systems that had protected him, the quiet agreements between men of influence, the assumption that certain people's crimes didn't matter, broke apart because someone finally forced them into the light. Garrison sends word from his new town that he's content in his reduced position. He was complicit, and the cost of that complicity was proportion. He learned his place. Thomas sometimes stands on the rise above his ranch at dusk and understands that something fundamental has shifted inside him. He's not lonely anymore. Solitude is different. Solitude is a choice you make because it fits who you are. Loneliness is what you feel when you want something you can't have. He stopped wanting something he couldn't have. But he's not quite belonging either. There's a distance between him and the community that wasn't there before. Some people are grateful. Others regard him with something more complicated than suspicion. He exists in his own kind of margin now, though his is drawn by choice and consequence rather than heritage. Yuki tends her garden in the light that arrives just before sunset, when the world softens and shadows stretch across the ground. The land grows what she plants. The herbs thrive. The vegetables rise. What was denied to her is now flowering under her hands. Thomas watches from the distance that respect has created between them, near enough to see her clearly, far enough to honor the space she's earned. The question doesn't answer itself, it lingers. Did his signature change everything, or did it simply reveal what was already true? A signature is just ink on paper until someone decides it matters. Thomas Whitmore's name on that deed didn't give Yuki her rights. She already had them. What it did was force the territory to stop pretending those rights didn't exist. Sometimes the smallest act, refusing to look away, refusing to accept injustice as normal, is the one that reshapes everything. And sometimes that's enough.